Tonight we enter England in the summer of 1553, when a dying boy king lies behind guarded doors, and a teenage girl is quietly lifted toward a crown that feels colder than iron. You stand near the walls of the Tower of London, where the river moves darkly beside the stone, carrying the smell of mud, tar, and old rain. The city is awake, but not loudly. It listens. It waits. In the records preserved by English archives and studied for generations by historians at Oxford, Yale, and Cambridge, one fact remains steady beneath the mist of legend. Lady Jane Grey was proclaimed Queen of England in July 1553, yet her rule lasted only 9 days. 9 days. Barely enough time for a bell to finish echoing across a parish church. Barely enough time for rumour to become law. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And as you settle in, write where you are watching from and your local time. It is strangely comforting to imagine quiet rooms across the world, all listening to the same old tragedy. You picture England not as a clean map in a school book, but as a damp and suspicious island. Roads are broken by summer dust and sudden rain. Messengers ride hard between manor houses. Priests lower their voices. Noblemen watch one another across polished tables, smiling in that careful Tudor way that usually means someone is about to lose everything. At the centre of this moment is not a battlefield, nor a great invading army, but a sick bed. King Edward VI, son of Henry VIII, is only 15 years old. He is young, educated, intensely Protestant, and already fading. His body weakens while his council whispers about succession, religion, and the terrifying possibility of Mary Tudor taking the throne. Mary is his half-sister. She's the daughter of Catherine of Aragon. She's also Catholic, determined, royal by birth, and loved by many who still remember the older faith with aching loyalty. To Edward and his Protestant advisers, her accession threatens more than a change of ruler. It threatens a reversal of the religious world they have been building. You can almost hear the scratch of quills in candlelit rooms. Names are written. Lines of inheritance are weighed like coins. The law says one thing, ambition suggests another, and fear leans over both like a shadow. There is a grim elegance to Tudor politics. It dresses murder in velvet. It calls panic a policy. Lady Jane Grey does not begin this story as a monster, usurper, or schemer. She's perhaps 16 or 17, though even that detail has been debated by scholars, because Tudor birth records can be stubbornly incomplete. She's learned, serious, and famously devoted to Protestant study. Contemporary accounts describe her as unusually educated, trained in Latin, Greek, and theology at a level that impressed even hardened intellectuals. A mainstream historical fact often noted by researchers of Tudor education is that elite noblewomen could receive extraordinary humanist training, though their learning rarely protected them from dynastic use. Jane is one of the clearest examples. Her mind is cultivated like a garden, yet her life is treated like a chess piece. She reads, translates, prays, and debates. While older men decide how her bloodline might serve their needs, her claim comes through her grandmother, Mary Tudor, the younger sister of Henry VIII. That makes Jane royal, though not first in line. In another world, this might have meant ceremonies, marriages, and polite attention at court. In this world, it makes her useful. Usefulness, in Tudor England, can be a fatal quality. A quirky fringe tidbit clings to Jane's story like ivy on old stone. Later tales claim she was so innocent of ambition that she fainted when told she had become queen. Some versions make the scene almost theatrical, with Jane collapsing in distress while nobles kneel around her. Historians treat the detail cautiously, because the sources are shaped by sympathy and later Protestant memory. Still, the image endures because it feels emotionally true, even when the evidence remains cloudy. You are not asked to believe every legend. You are asked to notice why such legends survived. People needed Jane to be innocent. They needed her to be reluctant. They needed her tragedy to mean something larger than another noble gamble gone wrong. The scholarly debate still breathes quietly around her. Some historians argue, with evidence drawn from council papers and ambassadorial reports, that Jane was primarily a victim of the Duke of Northumberland's political strategy. Others suggest she understood more than later tradition allowed, especially once the crown was placed before her. The truth may rest somewhere uneasily between childhood and agency, obedience and belief. It is possible that Jane knew the crown was dangerous. It is equally possible that she believed accepting it was an act of religious duty. In Tudor England, faith was not a private decoration. It was law, identity, family, memory, and sometimes a death sentence. To choose a ruler was to choose what prayers would sound like in church. It was to choose what books could be opened, what words could be spoken, and which souls might be considered safe. You walk in imagination through London's narrow streets, where the houses lean close together like gossiping neighbours. The air smells of river water, fish scales, horse sweat, and wood smoke. Apprentices gather outside shop fronts. Merchants pretend not to be nervous. Somewhere, a bell rings with official confidence, but the people do not answer with joy. That silence matters. London has known royal proclamations before. It has cheered, shouted, and performed loyalty when required. But when Jane is named Queen, the response is uncertain. Not rebellion yet, not acceptance either, just a pause. A city holding its breath can be more frightening than a city in flames. The Tower waits nearby, not only as prison, but as palace, armoury, treasury, and symbol. It is where kings prepare for coronations. It is also where enemies disappear behind stone. Jane enters it as Queen, which sounds magnificent until you remember where queens can end up. The same walls that shelter power can also preserve its victims. There is a cold lesson hidden in this first movement. Jane's tragedy does not begin with the axe. It begins with documents, marriages, prayers, and careful conversations among men who tell themselves they are saving England. It begins when a young woman's learning, lineage, and faith are braided together into a rope she did not weave. You sense the old world closing around her. The court whispers. The council calculates. Mary rides somewhere beyond the immediate reach of London, not yet defeated, not yet crowned, but very much alive. Edward's last wishes harden into policy. Northumberland's confidence begins to look less like strength and more like desperation wearing a fine coat. And Jane, quiet Jane, scholarly Jane, stands where no young woman should have been forced to stand. Beneath painted ceilings and watchful eyes, she receives a title that sounds divine and feels like a sentence. The crown does not glitter here. It presses downward. It asks for obedience. It asks for belief. It asks for blood, though perhaps not immediately. For now, there is only the beginning. The river moves. The candles sink lower. Somewhere in the city. A door closes softly, and someone decides not to cheer. In that hesitation, the 9 days begin. The chamber of the young king feels too still for summer. Heavy curtains soften the daylight, and the air carries the thick scent of wax, medicine, linen, and stale breath. You stand in that hush, where every footstep seems improper, and every whisper sounds like a confession. A crown rests somewhere beyond the room, but the body that owns it is failing. Edward VI is not an old ruler looking back over decades of command. He's a boy shaped by tutors, sermons, council meetings, and the enormous shadow of his father. Henry VIII had torn England from Rome, married with thunderous consequence, and left behind children whose very births became political arguments. Edward inherits not peace, but a religious storm wearing a royal seal. Records from his reign confirm that Edward's government pushed England more firmly toward Protestant reform. Scholars from Oxford and Cambridge have often emphasised the intensity of these years, especially the official prayer books, the removal of images from churches, and the reshaping of worship. These were not small adjustments. They changed the sound of parish life. They changed what people saw when they entered holy spaces. Imagine a village church at dusk. The old painted saints are scraped from the walls. Candles burn fewer and colder. Latin gives way to English prayers, familiar to some, unsettling to others. For the convinced reformer, this is purification. For the grieving Catholic grandmother in the back pew, it may feel like theft. England is not merely changing rulers. England is changing memory. Edward believes deeply in this transformation. His surviving writings show a young king who takes faith seriously, perhaps with the stern confidence only the very young can possess. He has been raised to see himself as a godly ruler, entrusted with truth. That conviction matters, because near the end of his life, succession becomes a spiritual problem as much as a dynastic one. Mary Tudor stands in the lawful line of inheritance, established under the later arrangements of Henry VIII. Yet Mary is Catholic. To Edward, her rule could open the door to restored papal authority, reversed reforms, and the punishment of Protestant leaders. You may feel the tension sharpen. The law points toward Mary. Edward's conscience recoils from her. The king's sickness deepens through 1553. Reports from foreign ambassadors and court observers speak of decline, weakness, and fear. The exact nature of his illness remains debated. Some historians have suggested tuberculosis. Others have considered severe lung infection or complications after earlier disease. The body keeps its secrets. Even royal bodies do. Here, the scholarly debate becomes particularly uneasy. Historians at major universities have examined Edward's final months through letters, chronicles, and diplomatic reports, yet the evidence resists certainty. Was the young king the principal architect of the succession device? Or did powerful counsellors guide his hand? Was he protecting Protestant England, or being used while fever and exhaustion narrowed his world? The documents speak, but softly. The central paper is often called Edward's device for the succession. At first, it seems to have aimed at future male heirs from the Grey line, avoiding both Mary and Elizabeth. But the plan changes. Since no such male heir exists in time, the crown is directed toward Lady Jane Grey and her male descendants. A legal imagination tries to outrun biology, politics, and time. It does not run fast enough. You see the strangeness of it. The young king is dying, yet the future is being drafted as if ink can command blood. A document can say who should rule, but it cannot make the kingdom believe. It cannot force the countryside to forget Mary. It cannot make every nobleman risk his estates for a teenager few common people have seen. There is a darker pressure in the room as well. The succession was not only about religion, though religion gave it moral force. It was also about survival for the men who had governed under Edward. If Mary became queen, many Protestants in high office had reason to fear disgrace, imprisonment, or worse. Their policies, wealth, and influence depended upon keeping the reforming regime alive. The Duke of Northumberland, John Dudley, looms over this moment. He is powerful, capable, and widely suspected. He has guided Edward's government after the fall of earlier protectors, and he understands the machinery of court politics. In May 1553, his son Guildford Dudley marries Lady Jane Grey. That timing feels heavy with meaning. Even if every participant used polite language, the marriage links Jane's bloodline with Northumberland's ambition. A quirky and unsettling tidbit survives from the atmosphere around Edward's illness. Some later accounts claimed the king's body was allowed to appear publicly only in controlled ways, because his decline had become too visible. Whether exaggerated or not, the rumour shows what people feared. In Tudor politics, Even a sick face could destabilise a kingdom. A coughing boy could become a national crisis. The court still performs order. Servants carry dishes. Physicians confer. Counsellors enter with grave expressions and careful bows. Yet beneath the rituals, everyone knows the old question is awakening. Who rules when the king dies? It is a simple question until the answer threatens to burn the kingdom. You feel the oppressive closeness of royal rooms. Tapestries hang thick on the walls. The floorboards creak beneath cautious feet. Outside, gardens bloom with summer fragrance, absurdly indifferent to the danger inside. Birds move through green branches while men argue over inheritance. Nature has a cruel talent for continuing. Edward's decision does not emerge from nowhere. Henry VIII had already unsettled the succession by declaring both Mary and Elizabeth illegitimate at different times, then later restoring them to the line by statute without fully erasing the stain. Jane's branch of the family, already descending from Henry's younger sister, remained close enough to be tempting. The Tudors had made family into law, then law into a maze. The device attempts to bypass Mary and Elizabeth, both half-sisters, both politically difficult, both marked by the controversies of their mothers. Jane appears cleaner to Protestant eyes. She is legitimate, noble, educated, and married into a powerful household. She's also young. Youth can look like virtue to people who want control, but a crown is never an empty ornament. Even when placed upon a young head, it gathers history's debts, expectations, and enemies. Edward may have imagined he was defending the true faith from corruption. Northumberland may have imagined he was preserving his own power through a necessary settlement. Lawyers may have imagined technical language could make the change acceptable. Each imagined something. The kingdom would imagine differently. This is the quiet tragedy of Edward's last design. It is not born only from villainy. That would be easier to understand. It is born from belief, fear, illness, calculation, and the strange Tudor habit of treating succession as both sacred destiny and administrative problem. The king wants a Protestant future. His counsellors want safety. Jane becomes the answer written into the space where certainty has died. In the chamber, the candles gutter. The young king grows weaker. His breath becomes part of the room's rhythm, watched by those who understand that each pause might alter history. Around him, papers wait, seals wait, ambitious men wait. Far away, Mary Tudor waits too, though not passively. Edward's design seems firm while he still lives. It has signatures, authority, and royal intention. It carries the impressive weight of government, yet it depends upon something fragile. It depends upon obedience at the exact moment obedience becomes dangerous. The sick room teaches you one of history's colder lessons. A kingdom may be changed by armies, plagues, harvests, and storms. But sometimes it turns upon a bed, a fever, and a boy convinced that heaven agrees with him. Somewhere beneath the scent of wax and herbs, the future of Lady Jane Grey is being prepared, not with chains yet, not with an axe, with ink. Your attention turns from the sick room to a young woman who's been taught to lower her eyes, sharpen her mind, and obey voices older than her own. Lady Jane Grey is not born into obscurity. She belongs to one of those dangerous families standing close enough to the throne to feel its warmth, yet close enough to be burned by it. She grows up among books, tutors, servants, needlework, discipline, and expectation. The world around her is not gentle simply because she is noble. Nobility can soften mattresses and fill plates, but it cannot always soften parents. In Jane's case, later accounts suggest a household ruled by severity, where excellence is demanded and affection may have arrived thinly, like winter light through clouded glass. You see her in a chamber smelling of parchment, rushes, and polished wood. A tutor bends over a page. A window admits pale daylight. Outside, dogs bark in the yard, and somewhere below, Kitchen knives strike boards with steady domestic rhythm. She reads languages most men around her do not fully command. Latin opens before her. Greek follows. Theology becomes not decoration, but shelter. One mainstream historical fact remains unusually striking. Humanist scholars across Europe admired educated noblewomen, and Jane became one of the best-known examples in Tudor England. Modern historians at Yale and Oxford have described her learning as part of a wider Renaissance culture, where elite girls could be trained for piety, correspondence, and dynastic display. Yet Jane's education seems to have gone further. It gave her an inner world. That inner world matters. Without it, she becomes only a pawn, and history grows too simple. With it, she becomes something more tragic. She is still used by others, certainly, yet she also has convictions, preferences, intelligence, and a severe spiritual courage that does not sound borrowed. The soft child of legend and the stern Protestant thinker may both be hiding in the same person. A famous story comes from the scholar Roger Ascham, who claimed to have found Jane reading Plato while the rest of her household hunted in the park. In his account, she preferred books to sport, reflection to noise, and learning to the rituals of aristocratic pleasure. The scene is almost too perfect. A clever girl alone with philosophy, surrounded by people chasing deer. Of course, memory polishes what it loves. Still, the image lingers because it gives you texture. Jane is not only a name beneath a crown. She's a girl who may have felt safer with pages than with people. Books do not order marriages. Books do not slap, threaten, or bargain. Books wait. They answer in silence. As for a lonely mind, that can feel merciful. Her parents, Henry Grey and Frances Brandon, stand near the royal family through blood. Frances is the daughter of Mary Tudor, Henry VIII's younger sister, making Jane part of the wider Tudor inheritance. This connection is not merely genealogical, it is a scent in the air, a constant awareness that the family's future may rise or fall according to the health, fertility, and favour of others. You sense how royal blood changes a room. It makes every greeting measurable. It turns marriage into diplomacy. It turns a daughter into a bridge, a bargain encounter, a possible answer to questions not yet asked. Jane does not need to seek power for power to seek her. That is one of the most unsettling truths of her life. By the early 1550s, Jane's Protestant reputation grows more important. She's not merely educated, but intensely devout. Her letters and later reported conversations show a mind trained in scriptural argument, especially against Catholic teaching. To modern ears, such disputes may seem narrow or harsh. To her world, they are matters of salvation, obedience, and truth. Nobody there thinks religion is only personal taste. The open scholarly debate around Jane often circles this question. Was her religion a private conviction used by others? Or did it make her willing to accept a public role she might otherwise have feared? Some researchers emphasize her youth and coercion, while others argue that Jane's own writings reveal a fierce commitment to Protestant reform. The evidence will not let her become entirely passive. It will not let her become fully powerful either. She lives in that painful middle, old enough to understand doctrine, young enough to be commanded, royal enough to be useful, female enough, in Tudor politics, to be treated as an instrument until the moment blame becomes convenient. There is a bitter cleverness in systems like that. They deny agency when giving orders, then discover agency when punishment is required. Her marriage to Guildford Dudley changes the air around her. The union connects her to the son of the Duke of Northumberland, the most powerful man in Edward's government. On paper, it can be described as noble alliance, suitable and impressive. In the mind, it feels more like a door closing. Jane is being moved into position, though the board has not yet been shown to her in full. A quirky fringe tidbit from later tradition says Jane resisted the marriage bitterly and had to be pressured into obedience. Some versions even claim she was physically forced by her parents. Historians approach such accounts carefully, since later writers wish to heighten her innocence and darken the ambition surrounding her. Yet the rumour points to something plausible. Jane's consent may have mattered far less than the plans built around her. You may imagine the wedding festivities with a strange unease. Fine fabrics shimmer, musicians play, sweet wine warms the throat, guests offer blessings in well-trained voices. Yet behind the celebration lies the machinery of succession. Marriage, in this world, is not a private union between two young people. It is a public instrument, polished until it reflects everyone except the bride. Guildford himself remains difficult to see clearly. He's often reduced to a handsome young husband, proud and unfortunate, or to a Dudley puppet standing near Jane's throne. The sources do not give him the depth they give her. He exists beside her, tied to her fate, yet somehow shadowed by the same forces that overpower them both. Even privilege can become a trap when fathers gamble above their children's heads. Jane's daily life before the crown may have contained moments of real quiet. You hear the soft scrape of a chair, the turning of a page, the rustle of a gown against wooden boards. Perhaps she walks in a garden scented with rosemary and damp earth. Perhaps she pauses near a chapel door, measuring the words of prayer in her mind. Perhaps she wonders whether obedience can ever be holy when it leads away from conscience. There is no need to paint her as flawless. Flawless people do not belong to history. Jane could be severe in belief, shaped by a world that taught certainty early. She may have viewed Catholic worship with contempt, just as her opponents viewed her Protestant convictions with alarm. She is gentle in memory, but probably not soft in argument. That makes her more human, not less tragic. Her brilliance does not save her. Her lineage does not save her. Her faith does not save her. Each becomes another thread pulling her toward the centre of a crisis she did not create alone. In a gentler century, she might have been remembered as a scholar, a translator, a devout aristocrat with unusually sharp thoughts. Tudor England offers her a smaller mercy. It makes her unforgettable by destroying her. Now you see Jane standing at the edge of the crown's shadow, not yet queen, not yet prisoner, but already enclosed by decisions made in guarded rooms. The scent of ink follows her, so does the scent of wax and wool and summer dust. Somewhere, bells are waiting to announce a future she has not chosen. Somewhere, powerful men are preparing to kneel, and perhaps that is the deepest sorrow of her youth. She's not dragged toward history by a single villain with a black heart. She's carried there by family duty, religious fear, political ambition, and the quiet habit of obedience. She's surrounded by people who may even tell themselves they love her. That is how the trap becomes almost invisible. The man behind the most dangerous movement of the summer is John Dudley, Duke of Northumberland, a figure whose shadow seems to lengthen across every chamber he enters. You do not meet him as a cardboard villain, rubbing his hands beside a poisoned cup. History is rarely that courteous. You meet him as something more useful and more unsettling, a capable survivor in a court where survival has become a profession. Northumberland has risen through violence, service, intelligence, and a gift for sensing which way power is leaning. He has seen men fall suddenly. He has watched families ruined by one careless sentence, one unlucky friendship, one signature placed under the wrong command. He knows that Tudor politics does not forgive weakness, though it often borrows the language of mercy when convenient. Records confirm that Northumberland dominated Edward's council during the last years of the young king's reign, guiding policy through a time of economic strain, religious reform, and fragile royal health. Historians at Cambridge and Stanford have described his government as more organised than hostile tradition once admitted. He was not merely a greedy schemer, he was an administrator, a soldier, and a politician with enemies eager to define him. That makes his gamble more interesting. He is dangerous because he is not foolish. Foolish men blunder into disaster. Northumberland walks toward it with documents, marriages, troops, and arguments ready in his hands. He believes the kingdom can be managed. Perhaps he believes people will obey the council because the council sounds like government. That belief becomes one of the quiet errors of the age. His problem is simple in shape and impossible in weight. Edward is dying. Mary Tudor is next by the ordinary legal expectation. Mary's arrival could undo Protestant reforms and threaten the men who carried them out. Northumberland himself would be exposed. His opponents would not need much imagination to portray him as the wicked architect of a stolen throne, so he looks for a solution that appears lawful enough, Protestant enough, and close enough to royal blood. Lady Jane Grey stands precisely where his needs gather. She's descended from Henry VIII's younger sister. She is young, devout, and newly tied to the Dudley family through marriage. Her claim is weaker than Mary's in popular understanding, but it is not invented from nothing. That is important. Tudor plots prefer a legal costume. You imagine Northumberland in council, surrounded by men who understand danger but disagree about its shape. The room smells of wax, damp wool, and the faint metallic tang of ink. Papers lie on a table. The king's wishes are discussed with solemn respect. Nobody says panic, though panic sits among them like an uninvited guest. The plan requires more than naming Jane. It requires speed. It requires the old nobility to bend. It requires London to accept the proclamation. It requires Mary to be contained before she can gather supporters. It requires everyone to behave like pieces on a board. Unfortunately for Northumberland, people are not pieces. They remember, hesitate, calculate, and sometimes choose loyalty for reasons power cannot measure. A quirky fringe tidbit attaches itself to Northumberland's story with peculiar persistence. Some later rumour claimed he arranged Edward's decline through sinister medicine or poison, as if every inconvenient Tudor death needed a hidden hand stirring the cup. Serious historians treat this with extreme caution, because evidence for poisoning is thin and the illness appears more naturally explained. Still, the rumour tells you how deeply people distrusted him. In politics, reputation can become a second body, walking ahead of you into every room. Northumberland's greatest strength may also be his weakness. He knows the elite world too well. He understands councils, seals, troops, alliances, and proclamations. He knows how to secure signatures from frightened men. But the succession is not decided only by elite paperwork. It must move through market squares, parish pulpits, local loyalties, household memories, and the stubborn emotional claim of Henry VIII's daughter. Mary has something Jane lacks. She has recognition. People know her name not merely from documents, but from decades of royal drama. They remember her mother. They remember Catherine of Aragon's humiliation. They remember Mary's endurance during her father's cruelty. Some pity her. Some admire her. Many believe blood and order stand with her, even if they fear her religion. Northumberland must overcome that recognition quickly. He cannot allow Mary time to become a banner, yet his own actions help create exactly that. When authority appears to move too cleverly, ordinary people grow suspicious. A crown handed to a newly married young noblewoman, connected to the ruling minister's family, looks less like divine providence and more like a family arrangement wearing national clothing. The open scholarly debate around Northumberland remains sharp. Some historians argue that his chief aim was self-preservation, with Protestant language serving as a noble wrapper. Others insist religious conviction genuinely shaped his choices, since the restoration of Catholic authority would endanger both his policies and his conscience. A third view sees both motives braided together, because in Tudor England, belief and advantage were rarely separated cleanly. You can sit with that uncertainty. It is more truthful than easy condemnation. Northumberland may have believed that England needed Jane. He may also have believed that he needed Jane. Human beings often place their own safety inside a sacred cause, then forget where one ends and the other begins. His household benefits from the arrangement, and that cannot be ignored. His son Guildford stands close to a potential queen. The Dudley name might rise to impossible heights, yet this advantage is also dangerous. Too obvious a benefit invites resentment. A successful coup must look like reluctant necessity. Northumberland's plan looks, to many eyes, like ambition dressed too quickly. There is a private cruelty in the marriage politics. Jane and Guildford are young, yet their union becomes a hinge upon which kingdoms may turn. Their feelings are secondary, their temperaments are secondary, their readiness is secondary. They are inserted into a structure built by fathers, counsellors, and fears. A wedding ring becomes part of a succession device. That is not romance. It is engineering. Northumberland prepares to act with the confidence of a man who has survived worse rooms. He secures the council's outward support. He gathers legal backing around Edward's device. He expects that official force, once assembled, will become reality. There is a certain hypnotic quality to power at close range. It persuades those who hold it that the rest of the country is quieter than it is. But beyond the court, England is not empty. East Anglian households know Mary's lands and presence. Local gentlemen assess risk with cold rural wisdom. Catholic sympathisers wait. But so do many who simply prefer lawful inheritance. Protestantism may be important to the ruling circle, yet legitimacy has its own religion. People worship order when disorder threatens their fields. You hear the roads beginning to matter, hooves will soon strike dust, letters will pass from hand to hand, sheriffs, captains, and townsmen will be asked to decide where loyalty lives. Northumberland's strategy depends upon controlling the first hours after Edward's death. In those hours, every delay becomes a leak in the roof. The council's obedience is not the same as loyalty. Some men sign because the king commands, some because Northumberland watches, some because they fear the consequences of refusal. A signature can look firm on parchment and tremble inside the signer's heart. The trembling will matter when Mary begins to move. Northumberland stands at the centre, still formidable, still persuasive, still surrounded by the apparatus of command. Yet beneath the polished surface, the plan has flaws. It asks too much secrecy from a court built on rumour. It asks too much obedience from nobles who smell danger. It asks too much acceptance from a people who may not understand Jane's claim, but understand Henry's daughter very well. For a moment, the gamble still appears possible. The young king's last will can be honoured. The Protestant settlement can be defended. The Dudley family can rise. Jane can be presented as rightful queen, solemnly chosen by lawful authority. It all seems arranged. If one stands close enough to the council table, step away and the arrangement begins to thin. The kingdom is wider than the room. Mary is not captured. London is uncertain. Jane is unknown. Northumberland has built a bridge over a river in flood, and now he must persuade everyone to cross it quietly. The proclamation begins not with joy, but with ceremony trying very hard to become joy. You stand near the tower as official voices prepare to tell London what London is expected to believe. The air is thick with river damp, horse breath, and the sour smell of crowded streets. A summer sky hangs above the city, pale and watchful, while the people gather in clusters that pretend not to be afraid. Lady Jane Grey is now presented as Queen. The words carry the authority of council, herald, seal, and trumpet. Yet words can travel strangely through a crowd. They may enter one ear as law and leave another as rumour. They may sound magnificent from a balcony and doubtful beside a market stall. That is the trouble with public power. It must be heard by private minds. The Tower of London, where Jane is brought, is not merely a prison in this hour. It is also a royal residence, a place where monarchs traditionally stay before coronation. Its stones have known banners, jewels, feasts, guarded doors, and whispered endings. You feel its double nature at once. It welcomes rulers and swallows victims. It can hold a crown and an executioner's block within the same imagination. Records confirm that Jane was proclaimed Queen on the 10th of July in the year 1553, following Edward's death and the council's acceptance of his altered succession plan. Historians connected with Oxford and the British Library have long noted that the proclamation was legal in performance, but fragile in popular acceptance. The ritual was real. The confidence behind it was not. Imagine the herald's voice rising through the street. Fine language rolls outward, naming Jane as rightful sovereign by the late king's device. Trumpets sound. Officials stand in their robes, stern and composed. But the expected roar does not come. No great wave of love breaks across London. Instead, there is watchfulness, the small murmur of uncertainty, the uncomfortable shuffle of feet. That silence becomes almost a character in the story. It moves through alleys and under doorways. It settles in taverns, where men lower their cups and ask what exactly has happened. It drifts through shops, where merchants wonder which name to write in their ledgers. It reaches households where servants whisper while laying trenchers for supper. A queen has been announced, yet belief has not arrived with her. Jane's own arrival at the Tower is surrounded by formal honour. She is served as a monarch. Nobles bend the knee. Ladies attend her. The machinery of majesty moves around her body, as if gesture can create certainty. Yet one can imagine the touch of cold stone beneath her fingers, the weight of embroidered fabric on her shoulders, the unnatural stillness of rooms where everyone watches too carefully. Here, the personal and political collide. Jane may have believed the crown belonged to her by Edward's lawful and godly command. She may also have trembled at the speed with which obedience had become sovereignty. The sources do not allow us to hear every thought. They leave spaces. In those spaces, you can sense a young mind measuring fear against duty. A mainstream historical fact, often emphasized by Tudor scholars at Yale and Cambridge, is that royal proclamations were central tools of government in 16th century England. They shaped public obedience through sound, ritual, and visible authority. A proclamation was not merely an announcement. It was a performance of rule, designed to make political change feel already accomplished. Yet in Jane's case, the performance failed to warm the crowd. The city's mood is important because London matters deeply. It is the largest city in the realm, the seat of commerce, the stage of royal theatre, and the place where rumour grows fat overnight. If London had erupted in loyalty, Jane's supporters might have gained precious momentum. Instead, the streets answer with caution. The people are not foolish. They understand that two queens cannot comfortably occupy one kingdom. A quirky fringe tidbit lingers around this moment. Some later stories claim that when Jane entered the Tower, she saw royal jewels and resisted giving Guilford Dudley the title of king, angering his family. The scene is difficult to prove in every detail, but it reflects a plausible tension. Jane may have accepted queenship as her own burden, while refusing to let her husband become king by marriage. Even in a trap, there may be boundaries. That detail, whether polished by later memory or rooted in real conflict, complicates the image of Jane as wholly passive. She's young, pressured, and surrounded, yet she's not necessarily empty. She can submit to a claim while resisting another. She can be used by ambitious people while still possessing a will. History often prefers simple victims. Human beings are less tidy. Within the Tower, meals are served, prayers are spoken, and councils meet. Outside, Mary Tudor has not vanished. That fact presses against every wall. The longer she remains free, the more Jane's throne becomes a question rather than an answer. Messengers come and go. Reports arrive from the countryside. The sound of footsteps in corridors begins to matter in a new way. The open, scholarly debate here concerns the depth of support Jane actually possessed in these first days. Some historians argue that the council's initial unity gave her government a real chance, especially if Mary had been seized quickly. Others point out that Jane's position was hollow from the start, dependent on a narrow court faction, and lacking the emotional legitimacy Mary commanded. The question remains soft at the edges, like a shape seen through rain. You feel that softness in the tower rooms. There is splendour, but not ease. Tapestries hang richly, but they cannot muffle political dread. Silver dishes shine, but appetite may fail. Servants bow, yet servants are often the first to know when a house is doomed. They see faces without masks. They hear doors close. They notice when confident men begin asking for news too often. Jane's title also produces a strange spiritual problem. If she believes her accession protects true religion, refusing it might seem like cowardice before heaven. But if the kingdom rejects her, holding it may bring bloodshed. She stands between obedience to a dead king, pressure from living nobles, and the mysterious judgment of God. For a devout teenager, this is not only politics, it is a wound in the soul. The proclamation's weakness exposes a deeper truth about Tudor monarchy. Royal authority is powerful, but it needs recognition. Blood, law, ceremony, religion, and public acceptance must interlock, or the crown sits uneasily. Jane has ceremony, she has signatures, she has Protestant argument. Mary has birth order, memory, and the stubborn force of being widely expected. Expectation can become a fortress. London's silence does not mean every person loves Mary. Many fear her Catholic faith. Many remember the burnings and persecutions associated with religious conflict across Europe. But fear of Mary is not the same as love of Jane. Northumberland's circle needs active loyalty, and the city offers hesitation. Hesitation is a poor foundation for a throne. As evening falls, the city changes colour. Smoke rises from chimneys, the Thames darkens, and the tower walls cool beneath the fading light. Somewhere, apprentices repeat what they heard. Somewhere, a priest wonders which prayers will soon be safest. Somewhere, a nobleman calculates how quickly he can change allegiance without appearing dishonourable. Tudor loyalty has flexible joints. Jane remains within the ancient fortress, called Queen by those around her, yet surrounded by uncertainty as thick as fog. The title rests upon her, formal and immense. It does not settle into the kingdom. It hovers. It waits for proof. And beneath the official trumpets, beneath the herald's language, beneath the respectful bows, another sound begins to emerge. It is not loud yet. It is the far road, the moving hoof, the gathering rumour of Mary Tudor's name passing from village to village. Jane has been proclaimed in London, but England has not finished answering. Mary Tudor rides through the eastern counties with danger at her back and inheritance ahead of her. You feel the road beneath the horses, dry in patches, soft where rain has touched the ruts, carrying the smell of crushed grass, sweat, leather, and July dust. This is not the smooth movement of a crowned queen through prepared streets. This is flight becoming resistance. She has been warned, and warning saves her. Instead of moving toward the trap that waits near London, she turns away and heads into territory where her name still carries force. The countryside opens around her, full of fields, church towers, manor gates, and watching faces. A woman who had spent much of her life being managed, humiliated, and threatened now begins to gather herself into a cause. Mary is no faint symbol drifting on banners. She is the daughter of Henry VIII and Catherine of Aragon, born into splendour, declared illegitimate, restored to succession, and tested by years of pressure. Her life has been a long argument with power. That matters now. People do not simply see a Catholic claimant. They see the wrong daughter of a famous king. They see endurance wrapped in royal blood. Records confirm that Mary rallied support in East Anglia, especially around Framlingham Castle in Suffolk, where nobles, gentlemen, tenants, and local forces gathered to her side. Historians at Oxford and Cambridge have often noted that her success came not from a single grand battle, but from swift regional mobilization and the collapse of confidence among her enemies. The countryside, so often treated as background, becomes decisive. You stand in the imagined courtyard of Framlingham, where stone walls rise above the surrounding land. Horses stamp, men call orders, servants carry baskets, letters, weapons, and news. The air smells of hay, rain-damp wool, and smoke from cooking fires. Mary's supporters arrive in growing numbers, some from conviction, some from loyalty, some because they sense where legitimacy is beginning to gather. There is something powerful in that gathering. Not theatrical, not polished, but steady. Local men bring armed retainers. Gentlemen arrive with household servants. Catholic sympathizers find courage. But so do people who may have little appetite for religious reversal. For many, the central issue is simpler. Mary is Henry's daughter, and the crown should pass to her. In uncertain times, simplicity can move faster than cleverness. Jane's government needs Mary contained quickly. Instead, Mary becomes visible. Visibility is dangerous. Once people see that she is alive, active, and surrounded by supporters, fear changes direction. The risk of helping her begins to seem smaller than the risk of opposing her. Tudor loyalty is often painted as grand principle, but it can also be practical weather sense. People watch the sky and move before the storm. Mary sends letters asserting her right. Those letters travel like sparks through dry reeds. They declare not merely grievance, but command. She does not beg for recognition. She claims it. That tone matters. A claimant who sounds uncertain invites bargaining. Mary speaks as one already wronged, already lawful, already queen in everything except formal possession. A mainstream historical fact emphasized by scholars of Tudor political culture is that legitimacy in 16th century England depended on more than legal argument. It rested upon public recognition, dynastic memory, local networks, and the willingness of armed elites to act. Mary activates all of these at once. Her bloodline is familiar. Her story is known. Her regional connections are real. Her danger is urgent. A quirky or fringe tidbit curls around Mary's ride through this period. Later tradition sometimes imagines villagers rushing to her with almost storybook devotion, as though all England rose with one heart. The reality was more mixed, but the legend reveals something important. People wanted her victory to feel like rightful order returning. Even memory dislikes admitting how much politics depends on hesitation, gossip, and changing calculations. The open scholarly debate turns on why Mary's support grew so fast. Some historians emphasize dynastic legitimacy above all, arguing that English political culture still valued hereditary right more than Protestant reform. Others stress local Catholic feeling, especially in regions where the old religion retained emotional power. Another interpretation sees Mary's triumph as a chain reaction, caused by Northumberland's failure to seize her early. Each view catches part of the light. For you, listening in the hush, the important thing is how quietly power migrates. It does not always move through coronation robes and jewelled crowns. Sometimes it moves along muddy roads, in sealed letters, in the decision of one hesitant gentleman to bring his men to the stronger claim. It moves when a household steward tells the servants which name to pray for. It moves when rumour changes its posture. Mary's identity as a woman also complicates the scene. England has not yet had a crowned queen regnant ruling in her own right. The possibility unsettles many. Yet in this crisis, her gender does not prevent support from gathering. It may even deepen sympathy among those who see her as a daughter cheated of her inheritance. The same society that mistrusts female rule can still rally to a royal woman when law and memory align behind her. You hear bells in small towns, though not all ring for the same reason. Some ring in fear, some in celebration, some because officials do not yet know which side will control tomorrow. The sound carries across fields where labourers pause and look up. News travels from market to alehouse, from alehouse to manor hall, from manor hall to parish steps. England becomes a listening creature. Meanwhile, Mary's court in motion begins to form around her. Advisers appear. Armed men cluster. Supplies must be arranged. Messages must be answered. She's no longer merely escaping. She's administering a claim under pressure. That transition is one of the most dramatic in the story, though it happens through paperwork, horse feed, and controlled courage rather than thunderous speeches. You may imagine her in a chamber at Framlingham as evening lowers over the walls. Candles are lit. Maps and letters cover a table. The smell of tallow and damp stone surrounds her. Outside, men settle for the night, with armour set near sleeping places and horses kept ready. Mary knows danger has not passed. A royal claim can gather quickly, but it can also be crushed if the opposing force arrives in time. Northumberland marches against her, but his movement carries a hidden weakness. He leaves London to deal with a rebellion that is not yet a rebellion in the usual sense. It is a rival legitimacy forming faster than his government can answer. While he rides outward, the council he leaves behind must decide how long to remain loyal to a plan that may already be failing. The road cuts both ways. Mary's presence in the East gives wavering men permission to change. That is crucial. Many are not eager martyrs for any cause. They want to survive the succession crisis with lands intact and heads attached. Once Mary appears likely to win, conscience, law, fear, and prudence begin walking in the same direction. Convenient, perhaps very human. There is also a deep emotional pattern in her rise. For years, Mary has been pressured to abandon her mother's memory and her faith. She has been watched, restricted, and made uncertain of her place. Now those years become political capital. Suffering, when publicly remembered, can harden into authority. She does not look like an ambitious outsider. She looks like the injured heir returning. The eastern landscape holds the tension with deceptive calm. Wheat bends in the wind. River reeds whisper. Villagers smell of bread ovens, animal yards, and wet earth. Yet beneath these ordinary things, the kingdom is choosing, not all at once, not cleanly. Choice rarely arrives cleanly. It comes through messengers, murmurs, signatures withdrawn, gates opened, and soldiers deciding whom they will not fight. Mary rides through this landscape as both claimant and omen. Her supporters multiply, her enemies hesitate. The air around her thickens with inevitability. That strange force historians can describe only after it has succeeded. In the moment, nothing is inevitable. The roads are uncertain. The loyalties are unfinished. The danger remains close. Still, something has shifted. The crown proclaimed in London has not rooted deeply enough. While Mary's claim grows roots in fields, castles, households, and memory, the 9 days are no longer simply a reign. They are becoming a contest between paper authority and living recognition. In the fading light over Framlingham, you sense the old Tudor world turning toward her. Not tenderly, never tenderly, but decisively enough. Somewhere beyond the castle walls, another rider arrives with another pledge, another rumour, another small piece of England falling into place. Power begins to vanish from Jane's hands in a way that feels almost soundless. There is no great clash beneath the tower walls, no glorious defence of a youthful queen against roaring armies. Instead, you sense something more unnerving. Doors open more slowly. Courtiers speak more carefully. Messengers arrive with faces that have already decided what their mouths are afraid to say. The tower remains splendid, but its splendour has grown thin. The rooms still contain rich hangings, polished vessels, and the formal movements of service. Yet beneath every bow lies a question. Who will still kneel tomorrow? Who will vanish before dawn? Who will claim they never truly supported Jane at all? The air smells of extinguished candles, damp stone, and the sharp anxiety of people adjusting their consciences, Jane's government depends on certainty, and certainty is exactly what begins to leak away. Mary's support expands through the eastern counties. While London remains uncertain, Northumberland has ridden out to confront the threat, leaving the council behind. That absence matters. The strongest hand has left the room, and the men who remain begin listening to their own fear. Records confirm that the Privy Council abandoned Jane and proclaimed Mary Queen on the 19th of July in 1553. Researchers at Oxford, Cambridge, and the British Library often treat this reversal as the decisive collapse of Jane's rule. It was not a battlefield victory, it was a political evaporation. The men who had raised Jane up now stepped away, and the crown fell with them. You can imagine the council chamber as the change approaches. Papers rest on the table, some still bearing the weight of recent promises. Men who had spoken firmly days earlier now measure every word. Their loyalty to Jane is trapped between law, survival, and the growing certainty that Mary will triumph. A council can make a queen, but it can also unmake one by leaving her alone. This is one of the coldest features of the tragedy. Jane's power is never truly her own. It exists only while others agree to perform it around her. When that performance stops, the title becomes a sound without a body. Queen Jane becomes Lady Jane again, not because her belief changes, but because the structure surrounding her dissolves. How heavy a crown must feel when everyone else begins pretending it was never real. The open scholarly debate around these days asks whether Jane ever had a practical chance of survival as queen. Some historians argue that swift military action against Mary might have preserved her claim, at least briefly. Others believe the plan was doomed from the moment Mary escaped custody, because dynastic legitimacy and public recognition favoured Henry's daughter too strongly. The debate remains unsettled, partly because failure makes every alternative look clearer than it truly was. Inside the Tower, news does not arrive as clean history. It arrives in pieces, a report from one county, a delay from another, a nobleman's uncertain answer, a rumour that the council is wavering, a servant who has heard something from a guard who heard something from a boatman. This is how collapse feels while it is happening, not a chapter title, a spreading chill. Jane's own response is difficult to reconstruct with certainty. Later accounts often show her as composed, prayerful, and wounded by betrayal. That may be true, though such portraits also served Protestant memory. Still, it is reasonable to imagine bewilderment. For days, she has been addressed as Queen. Now the same world changes its language. Titles vanish quickly when fear enters the room. A quirky fringe tidbit from later tradition says that some people in London celebrated Mary's proclamation with such sudden enthusiasm that the city seemed to wake from a bad dream. Bonfires, bells, and cheers appear in accounts of the reversal. The reality was probably mixed, but the speed of public celebration is revealing. Crowds know when danger has shifted. They also know the comfort of joining the winning sound. You stand in the city as Mary's name begins to ring openly. Bells gather force above rooftops. The smell of smoke rises from fires lit in celebration or relief. Apprentices shout. Tavern doors open. People who had stayed cautious now discover how loyal they have always been. There is gentle sarcasm hiding in history here. Nothing improves a memory of courage quite like knowing the outcome. For Jane, the same bells must have sounded different. Celebration for one claimant becomes a sentence for another. Each cheer outside the Tower confirms her isolation. Each ringing bell tells her that the realm has chosen, or at least chosen enough. The sound crosses the river, enters Stone, and becomes part of the prison air long before formal imprisonment is admitted. Northumberland's position also crumbles. His march against Mary loses purpose as the council abandons the cause. The leader of the plan finds himself stranded between command and disgrace. He too eventually proclaims Mary, an act that feels less like loyalty than a man trying to step away from his own shadow. it does not save him. Tudor regimes rarely admire failed architects. The mainstream historical fact here is harsh and simple. Jane's reign is traditionally counted as 9 days, though even that number depends on how one measures proclamation, recognition, and collapse. Historians at major research institutions continue to discuss whether she should be listed as a monarch at all, since her accession was contested and never crowned. Yet her brief rule remains embedded in English memory precisely because it is so brief. 9 days is a strange measure for sovereignty. A harvest takes longer. A ship crossing rough water may take longer. A fever may burn longer in an ordinary household. Yet in those 9 days, law, religion, gender, family, and fear expose themselves with startling clarity. Time compresses. The structure of the kingdom becomes visible because it is breaking. The council's betrayal also reveals the nature of elite loyalty. Many of the men who supported Jane had signed documents, made declarations, and participated in the ritual of her accession. When Mary's victory seemed likely, they changed course with impressive moral flexibility. One might call it prudence, one might call it cowardice. Tudor England usually called it survival. Jane is left with the consequences of obedience. This is one reason her story has remained so disturbing. The older men who built the plan could argue necessity, pressure, or misjudgment. Some would die, some would adapt, but Jane, young and symbolic, becomes the visible face of the failed usurpation. She is not the only actor, yet she is the image history cannot release. You feel the emotional narrowing around her. The chambers that had briefly held royal dignity now feel like rooms waiting to be reassigned. The servants' voices change. The guard's posture changes. Even silence changes. It no longer protects ceremony. It prepares captivity. The crown has not been torn from her in public spectacle. It has simply stopped being recognized. That may be worse. There is a special loneliness in losing power that others once insisted you had. Jane may have wondered whether she had sinned by accepting it, or whether she had merely been abandoned by those who commanded her acceptance. For a conscience trained in severe faith, both possibilities could wound. Mary's triumph approaches London not as an abstract claim, but as a living authority about to enter the capital. The city now leans toward her. The council speaks her name. The bells declare the reversal. The old legal expectation has returned with force. The kingdom exhales, though not everyone will breathe easier for long, and within the tower, Jane's 9 days end in a quiet that feels almost ceremonial. The title fades from the room. The bows cease to mean what they meant. The young woman who was called Queen remains physically present, but the world around her has rewritten itself. There is no need for thunder. The tragedy has learned to whisper. Captivity settles around Jane with a patience more frightening than chains. The tower has changed its face again, as old buildings often do when power turns. The same stone that recently received her as sovereign now contains her as prisoner. You feel the chill in the walls, the dampness rising through the floor, the faint smell of river mist and old smoke clinging to the corridors. There is no immediate rush toward death. That is part of the cruelty. A sudden ending can be terrible, but waiting teaches fear to breathe beside you. Jane remains alive, watched, confined, and studied by those who understand that her body has become political property. She is no longer useful as a queen. She may still be useful as an example. Mary enters London in triumph, acclaimed by crowds and recognised by the council that had briefly denied her. The city performs loyalty with impressive volume. Bells sound, bonfires burn. Citizens cheer the daughter of Henry VIII, the lawful heir, the survivor. Yet beneath the celebration lies a practical question. What should be done with the girl who wore the crown for 9 days? Records confirm that Jane was imprisoned in the Tower after Mary's accession. While several principal supporters of the failed settlement faced immediate danger, historians at Yale and Oxford have often noted that Mary initially showed restraint towards Jane. distinguishing the young woman from the older men who had engineered the crisis. This matters. At first, Jane's death is not inevitable. You stand inside that uneasy mercy. It is not soft mercy, not the kind sung about by poets. It is political mercy, guarded and conditional. Jane is spared because she is young, because she was pressured, because killing her immediately might look unnecessary, and because Mary's first task is to stabilise a shaken kingdom. A new ruler must punish enough to appear strong, yet not so much that victory begins to look like fear. Northumberland is executed in August, and his fall sends a clear message. The architect pays. His repentance, including a return to Catholic forms before death, shocks Protestant observers and later stains his memory among those who admired reform. The man who helped lift Jane toward the throne dies as the old order reclaims the stage. Jane remains behind, alive in the fortress, breathing beneath the consequences. The tower is not silent around her. It holds many lives, many footsteps, many little domestic noises. Guards speak in low voices. Keys turn. Meals arrive. Clerks pass through with papers. Boats move along the Thames outside, their oars dipping and lifting in a rhythm older than dynasties. Even prisons contain routine. That routine can become another form of sorrow. Jane may have had some degree of comfort compared with common prisoners. Noble blood often brought better lodging, servants, books, and writing materials. Though comfort in captivity is still captivity, a cushion does not open a locked door. A candle does not soften a death sentence waiting somewhere beyond the next decision. Privilege can decorate fear, but it cannot always dismiss it. A mainstream historical fact is that the Tower served multiple functions in Tudor England. It was palace, arsenal, treasury, menagerie, record house, and prison. Scholars at major British and American universities have used its history to show how monarchy fused splendour with coercion. Jane's presence there reveals that fusion perfectly. She inhabits a royal space that has become a cage. A quirky tidbit, half grim and half absurd, concerns the Tower's old reputation for strange creatures. For centuries, lions and other exotic animals had been kept there as part of the royal menagerie. By Jane's time, stories of beasts in the Tower were already part of its atmosphere. Imagine that, if you can. A scholar girl confined by politics, while somewhere in the same ancient complex, royal animals had once paced behind bars. Tudor symbolism was rarely subtle. The scholarly debate around Mary's first intentions remains important. Some historians argue she truly wished to spare Jane, provided no further rebellion made her dangerous. Others suggest Jane's survival was always uncertain, because any alternative Protestant claimant could become a rallying point. The evidence allows a narrow window of mercy, but the window looks out upon a storm. Jane's father, the Duke of Suffolk, complicates that mercy. He had supported the attempt to place her on the throne, yet he too receives pardon at first. Mary's clemency toward him may have reflected calculation, fatigue, family connections, or a desire to begin her reign without excessive bloodshed. Whatever the motive, it creates the impression that Jane might live out her days in confinement, diminished but breathing. You can imagine Jane with books again. The setting is poorer, colder, watched, but still she may turn toward reading and prayer. The page becomes a narrow field of freedom. Words can cross walls. Scripture, for her, is not merely comfort, it is argument, armour, and conversation with eternity. In a world where counsels shift and families fail, divine text seems steadier than human promises, yet even spiritual steadiness carries pain. Jane must examine her own part in the crisis. Did she obey wrongly? Did she resist enough? Did God require acceptance of the crown, or humility before Mary's right? Tudor faith does not encourage easy self-forgiveness. It searches the soul with a candle and a knife. For Jane, captivity may have become an inward trial as much as an outward punishment. Mary meanwhile begins the work of ruling. She must restore order, manage religious change, reward loyalty, punish treason, and prepare the kingdom for a Catholic future. She also has to consider marriage. A queen regnant needs political partnership, and every possible husband carries consequences. The question of Mary's marriage will soon change Jane's fate, though no one in Jane's chamber can yet measure the full danger. For now, the prisoner waits. Waiting has texture. Morning light creeps across stone. Food cools on a plate. A voice passes beyond the door. Rain taps against a window. Somewhere nearby, a lock catches with a small iron sound. These details seem minor, but captivity is built from minor things repeated until they become a world. There may have been moments when Jane believed she would survive. There may have been moments when she expected death before sunset. The mind in prison travels between extremes. Hope enters quietly, then shame follows it, asking whether hope is foolish. Fear enters loudly, then exhaustion softens it. The days do not ask permission to pass. Jane's youth remains central. She is not a child in Tudor legal terms, but she is young enough that modern listeners feel the injustice sharply. Her age does not erase her intelligence or conviction. It deepens the discomfort. She has enough understanding to suffer from conscience, yet not enough worldly power to have shaped the crisis alone. That imbalance is the bruise at the heart of the story. The Tower holds her in a suspended state. Not queen, not free, not dead. She becomes a living question Mary has not answered. Around her, the kingdom begins rearranging itself under its rightful queen, and many people prefer not to think too long about the girl left inside the walls. Victorious societies are very good at looking away from inconvenient prisoners. Evening comes again over the Thames. The water darkens, and the fortress gathers the day back into itself. A candle burns near Jane's hand. Perhaps she reads. Perhaps she prays. Perhaps she listens to the city that once hesitated to cheer for her, and now belongs to another woman. The stone does not explain, it only keeps. For a little while, Mercy and danger share the same room. The air around Jane changes when rebellion begins to breathe beyond the Tower walls. Until this moment, her danger has been serious, but partly contained, like a blade left on a table. Now the blade is lifted. The kingdom hears new hoofbeats, new rumours, new shouts carried from road to road, and the imprisoned girl becomes useful to men she has never commanded. The cause is not Jane alone. It is larger, messier, and more dangerous. Mary's proposed marriage to Philip of Spain unsettles many English subjects, even some who had supported her claim to the throne. They fear foreign influence, Spanish power, Catholic restoration, and the possibility that England might become a smaller room inside a larger empire. The old anxieties of island politics rise quickly. Foreign husbands make English nerves itch. Thomas Wyatt the Younger emerges as the most famous rebel leader. He is a Kentish gentleman, not a wild stranger from the margins. That matters. Rebellion led by respectable men carries a different threat than scattered disorder. It suggests that discontent has entered houses with coats of arms, legal training, armed tenants, and family networks. The danger wears gloves. Records confirm that Wyatt's rebellion broke out in January 1554, centred especially in Kent, with opposition to Mary's Spanish marriage as its main public grievance. Historians at Oxford, Yale, and other major institutions have often noted that the revolt also carried religious and dynastic tensions beneath the marriage issue. A proposed foreign match was the spark, but dry wood had been gathering for months. You stand on a winter road in Kent, not under warm July dust, but beneath a colder sky. Mud grips boots. Hedges stand dark and wet. Men gather with weapons that may look unimpressive beside royal artillery, yet feel terrifying in local hands. Pikes, bills, bows, household armour, and nervous courage appear among the villages. Rebellion often smells less like glory than damp wool, sweat, and trampled earth. Wyatt's followers march toward London, and every mile tightens the noose around Jane. She's not leading them, she's not writing their orders, yet her name hovers near the revolt because she remains a Protestant alternative to Mary. So does her father, Henry Grey, Duke of Suffolk, whose involvement proves disastrous. His renewed action destroys the fragile mercy that had helped keep Jane alive. Here the tragedy sharpens. Jane has been spared partly because she could be treated as a misled young woman, but rebellion changes what a prisoner represents. A living claimant can become a banner, even unwillingly. Mary does not need to believe Jane is plotting actively. She only needs to understand that others may plot in her name. That is enough. A mainstream historical fact often stressed by Tudor scholars is that treason in the 16th century was not judged only by personal intention. Dynastic threat mattered intensely. A person with royal blood could endanger a monarch simply by existing during a rebellion. Jane's innocence, even if granted, could not erase the political uses others might make of her. Her body had become a possible future. The open scholarly debate around Wyatt's rebellion remains layered. Some historians describe it mainly as a nationalist uprising against Spanish marriage. Others emphasize Protestant resistance to Mary's religious direction. A third interpretation sees elite frustration, local politics, and fear of foreign domination combining in ways that cannot be separated neatly. The rebels themselves likely held mixed motives. History rarely files its paperwork in one folder. Mary's response is tested in public. London is anxious. The Queen must show that she can command, persuade, and survive. She speaks at the Guildhall, rallying citizens with a force that later accounts remember vividly. Even those wary of her policies could recognise courage when the gates of the capital seemed uncertain. Mary is often remembered through later fires and failures, but in this crisis she shows steel. You hear London again, but it is a different London now. The streets are colder. The crowd is not merely watchful, but frightened. Gates matter. Bridges matter. The loyalty of armed citizens matters. The smell of smoke hangs low. People wonder whether fighting will spill into the markets, whether shops will be looted, whether the wrong shout might bring soldiers to the door. Wyatt reaches the edge of the capital, but momentum fails. The city does not open to him in the way a rebel needs. Royal forces hold. Confusion spreads. His cause strains beneath distance, uncertainty, and the difficulty of turning protest into conquest. Rebellion is simple while imagined. It becomes complicated when streets, gates, tired men, and royal authority stand in the way. A quirky fringe tidbit follows Wyatt's march in later storytelling. Some tales make it seem as though London almost fell by a hair's breadth, with the city saved at the last possible breath by confusion and weathered courage. The truth is difficult to stage so neatly, but the feeling is understandable. For those living through it, the whole city must have seemed balanced on a wet plank above dark water. For Jane, the rebellion's failure is not rescue. It is ruin. Her father's involvement ties the Grey family once again to active treason. Mary's council can now argue that leaving Jane alive invites fresh danger. The young prisoner is no longer merely the remnant of a failed July settlement. She is the symbol around which Protestant and anti-Spanish unrest might gather. Symbols are rarely allowed to live peacefully in Tudor politics. You may feel the dreadful unfairness of that logic. Jane does not need to raise a sword. She does not need to call a meeting. She does not need to send a letter promising a crown. Her existence does the work for others. In a dynastic monarchy, blood can speak without permission. That is why royal blood is both privilege and curse. Mary's own position helps explain the severity. She is newly crowned, unmarried, childless, and attempting religious restoration in a realm still full of Protestant officials and nervous nobles. Her right has been vindicated, but not yet secured by years of peaceful rule. A second challenge, even a failed one, teaches every ruler an unpleasant lesson, mercy can be interpreted as weakness by those waiting for another chance. The council now looks at Jane differently. The argument for sparing her grows thinner. Compassion remains possible in private, perhaps even in Mary's conscience, but politics presses against it. A queen may pity a cousin and still sign what kingship demands. That is one of monarchy's more chilling tricks. It turns personal feeling into a luxury. The tower's atmosphere tightens. Guards are more alert. Questions become heavier. News of Wyatt's capture moves through corridors like a cold draft. Jane may learn that her father has risen and failed. She may understand at once what that means. Perhaps the candle flame near her hand seems smaller. Perhaps prayer becomes less a comfort than a final discipline. Guildford Dudley, still imprisoned, is drawn closer to the same fate. The rebellion does not create his sentence, but it helps make execution necessary in the eyes of Mary's government. Young lives that had been paused are set in motion again, toward the scaffold. The machinery, once restarted, does not easily stop. There is an unsettling pattern here. The summer crisis made Jane queen without granting her real power. The winter rebellion makes her dangerous without requiring her action. In both cases, other people's choices gather around her until they become her destiny. She is central and powerless at the same time. That contradiction is why the story refuses to sleep quietly. Outside, the rebellion collapses into arrests, interrogations, confessions, and fear. Men who had marched with purpose now face the careful questions of authority. Names are demanded, motives are sorted, blame seeks bodies. The state reasserts itself not only with soldiers, but with papers, courts, and the slow closing of legal doors. Jane's door is one of them. The mercy that once shared her room with danger begins to withdraw, not dramatically, not with a scream. It steps back like light leaving stone at dusk. The rebellion has answered the question Mary could postpone no longer. As long as Jane lives, others may imagine another settlement, another rising, another Protestant queen placed above a Catholic ruler. Whether Jane desires it no longer matters enough. The realm has made her into a possibility, and possibilities can be fatal. The law now enters the story with clean hands and a cold face. It does not arrive like a murderer in a dark cloak. It arrives as procedure, as indictment, as a courtroom, as men trained to make death sound orderly. You feel the shift at once. The drama leaves the open road and steps into panelled rooms, where ink can become more frightening than steel. Jane is brought into the machinery of treason, and Tudor treason is a vast net. It catches acts, intentions, words, symbols, and sometimes the mere position of a body too close to the crown. The charge against her is not simply that she existed, nor even that she was ambitious. It is that she had accepted and exercised royal authority against Mary, the lawful queen recognised by the realm. The trial takes place at Guildhall in London, a civic space heavy with authority and public meaning. You can imagine the cold of November pressing against the walls, the smell of damp wool rising from gathered bodies, the scrape of shoes on stone, the murmur that dies when officials enter. Jane is no longer dressed in the borrowed radiance of queenship. She stands as a prisoner beneath judgment. Records confirm that Lady Jane Grey, Guildford Dudley, and others were tried for high treason in November 1553. Historians at Oxford and Yale have often observed that the legal case against her was strong by Tudor standards, even if the moral case remains troubling to later minds. She had been proclaimed queen. Documents had been issued in her name. That was enough for the law to close its hand. The sentence is terrible, and the wording belongs to a world that believed punishment should instruct the public. Jane is condemned to death, with the method depending upon royal decision. The court does not pause to ask whether a teenage woman had freely shaped the events around her. Law is not always curiosity. Sometimes it is a corridor built toward a single door. There is an open scholarly debate about how much real choice Jane had during the accession crisis. Some historians emphasise coercion by parents, counsellors, and Northumberland's faction, portraying her as legally guilty but politically overpowered. Others argue that Jane, once informed of Edward's device, accepted the crown from religious conviction and therefore participated knowingly. The painful truth may be that coercion and conviction live together inside the same small chamber. Jane pleads guilty. That detail matters, though it should not be read too simply. A guilty plea in this setting does not necessarily mean wholehearted moral confession. It may reflect legal reality, spiritual humility, lack of practical defence, or the knowledge that the verdict is already waiting. Courts can ask questions whose answers have been prepared before the prisoner arrives. A quirky tidbit follows the legal world of her trial. Tudor punishments often included elaborate distinctions of rank, gender, and royal mercy, so the form of death could become a final political message. A noble woman might be spared the most degrading public horrors assigned to others, yet still face execution. It is grimly polite. The age could be exquisitely attentive to status while taking a life. Guildford is condemned too, so are others bound to the failed regime. The courtroom gathers young bodies and old ambitions together, flattening differences beneath the word treason. This is one of those moments when history's categories seem both accurate and cruel. They explain the law, they do not explain the heart. Mary does not immediately carry out Jane's sentence. That pause is important, because it shows again that execution is not automatic at first. A sentence can hang above a prisoner like a roof of ice, gleaming and motionless. Jane returns to captivity with death legally pronounced, but not yet scheduled. She lives inside an interval between judgment and command. You imagine that interval as a strange narrowing of time. Each morning may feel undeserved. Each night may feel borrowed. The candle beside her burns with ordinary flame, yet everything ordinary has changed. Bread, ink, prayer, sleep, and footsteps all take on the weight of possible last things. The body continues its habits while the mind counts what cannot be known. The law has done more than condemn Jane. It has transformed her from uncertain captive into a person already marked for death, awaiting only the Queen's will. In Tudor monarchy, this distinction is profound. The courts may pronounce sentence, but the sovereign decides when mercy ends. Mary holds that terrible power, and she holds it while rebellions, marriage fears, and religious divisions darken the realm. A mainstream historical fact often emphasised by legal historians is that Tudor treason law expanded the reach of royal security. It treated challenges to the monarch's title as direct attacks on the body politic, the imagined body of the realm itself. Jane's brief queenship therefore became more than a mistaken ceremony. It became an assault upon Mary's legitimate identity as queen. For modern listeners, this can feel harsh beyond measure. Yet for Mary's government, ambiguity was dangerous. If Jane could be treated merely as misled, then perhaps future claimants could be misled too. If the 9-day queen remained alive after New Rebellion, her name might invite another experiment. Law was being used not only to punish the past, but to silence possible futures. The trial also gives Jane a strange dignity. She is no longer only the girl overwhelmed by events. She stands publicly, hears the accusation, and accepts judgment, whether from submission, exhaustion, courage, or faith. She meets the court without the chaos of denial. That composure becomes part of her legend, though legend always smooths the trembling fingers. You feel the human loneliness beneath the legal language. Jane may know that her father's renewed rebellion has made mercy far less likely. She may think of her mother, of Guildford, of the books she once read in quieter rooms. She may remember lessons in obedience and wonder where obedience ended. She may search her conscience for the line between duty and sin. The men judging her do not need to solve those inward questions. Their work is narrower. They must confirm that the crown was claimed unlawfully, that Mary's title was denied, that treason occurred. They do this with the grave confidence of institutions everywhere. Institutions rarely weep while functioning correctly, and yet someone in that hall may have felt pity. A clerk, a guard, a spectator pressed near the wall. Pity does not always change outcomes. Sometimes it only bears witness. Perhaps a person watching her thought of a daughter at home, or a sister, or a scholar with ink on her fingers. Perhaps they looked away when sentence fell. When Jane returns to the tower, the city outside continues in its ordinary appetite. Markets open, fires are lit, boats pass, children quarrel. The world's indifference is never complete, but it is persistent. A life can be legally broken while fish are sold a few streets away. History contains both at once, and that is why it feels so cold. The trial is already decided in the deepest sense, not because the forms are fake, but because the political reality leaves almost no room for rescue. Jane's guilt under the law is clear enough for the age. Her innocence in the imagination is clear enough for sorrow. Between those two truths, she waits. The legal record closes around her softly, like a book being shut in a dim room. It does not answer whether she deserved death. It only shows how a kingdom taught itself to need her death. One clause, one signature, one judgment at a time. Faith becomes the last room Jane can fully inhabit. The walls around her may belong to the Queen, the keys may hang at another person's belt, and the sentence may wait in official silence, but her conscience remains a territory more difficult to seize. You feel the atmosphere change from politics into something narrower, quieter, and more intimate. The struggle is no longer only for a crown, it is for the meaning of a soul. Jane's Protestant belief is not a polite preference, nor a family fashion worn because powerful men find it useful. It is the language through which she understands suffering, authority, obedience, and death. Her learning has trained her to argue from Scripture, to test doctrine, and to distrust what she sees as false worship. In captivity, that training does not become abstract, it becomes breath. Records confirm that Jane wrote letters and statements during her imprisonment, and later Protestant writers preserved some of them as examples of courage under Catholic rule. Historians at Yale, Oxford and Cambridge have long treated these writings carefully, aware that printed versions could be shaped by religious memory. Still, even through that filter, a serious and educated voice emerges. Jane speaks as someone who has thought deeply, not merely someone repeating lessons. You imagine her seated near a small table, the light weak but usable. The smell of ink, wax, and cold stone surrounds her. A page lies before her, and the quill waits between her fingers. Outside the room, there are guards, doors, and footsteps. Inside the sentence, there is grammar, scripture, and the stubborn act of arranging thought before death. Her faith makes her brave, but not simple. Brave people can still fear. Courage does not require a body free from trembling. It may appear while the heart beats too quickly and the mouth feels dry. Jane's courage is not the loud sort, not the kind that shouts across a battlefield. It is the quieter kind that keeps writing while the world has already decided the ending. A mainstream historical fact often emphasised by scholars of the English Reformation is that religious controversy in Tudor England was deeply textual. Books, translations, sermons, prayers, and printed arguments shaped identity and allegiance. Jane belongs to this world of words. Her battlefield is partly the page. Her weapons are interpretation, conviction, and the belief that truth can remain truth even when the state condemns it. That belief brings her into contact with Catholic attempts to convert her before death. Mary's government has reasons to desire such a conversion. If Jane recants, her execution becomes less useful to Protestant memory. If she dies Catholic, the symbol changes colour. The government does not merely want her body subdued, it would prefer her conscience surrendered too. The figure often associated with these efforts is John Feckenham, a learned Catholic cleric sent to speak with her. Later accounts present their exchanges as courteous but firm, a contest of doctrine conducted under the shadow of the scaffold. You can almost hear the low voices in the chamber, not shouting but pressing. He offers salvation as he understands it. She answers with the sharp seriousness of a person who has no time left for politeness without substance. The open scholarly debate here concerns how accurately later Protestant editions preserve Jane's final words in disputes. Some historians see genuine material shaped by editors for devotional purposes. Others warn that martyr literature often sharpened dialogue and simplified personalities into examples. The safest path is not to dismiss the writings, but to listen with care. A voice can be real even when later hands frame it. A quirky fringe tidbit clings to Jane's final book. The small volume she reportedly gave to a Tower official or family connection with a written message inside. Such objects gather almost supernatural tenderness in memory. A book becomes more than paper and binding. It becomes a relic of thought, a portable chamber where the condemned person seems to keep breathing. You can understand why people treasured it. The Tudor state could take Jane's title, freedom, and life, but the written page allowed her to remain uncomfortably present. Her handwriting, or even the idea of it, carried intimacy across generations. It is one thing to know a person died. It is another to imagine the hand moving slowly, calmly, while death waited nearby with official patience. Jane's words to others often circle themes of steadfastness, humility, and distrust of worldly glory. That last theme cuts deeply. She has seen glory at its most poisonous. A crown arrived for her with kneeling nobles, ceremonial language, and the full costume of majesty. Then it became an indictment. Few people learn so quickly that earthly honour can turn into a trapdoor. There is gentle irony here, almost too bitter for comfort. The education meant to adorn a noblewoman has given Jane the means to resist spiritually. The theology that made her useful to political men now gives her an inner strength beyond their reach. The same Protestant identity that helped place her in danger becomes the shape of her endurance. History is fond of cruel symmetry. You feel the cold in the room deepen as the execution approaches. Time no longer stretches vaguely. It begins to gather into a date, then into a morning, then into hours. A person under sentence may become intensely aware of the body, the roughness of cloth, the taste of water, the ache in the hand after writing, the small warmth of a candle. Death makes the ordinary shine with unbearable precision. Jane's refusal to convert is not merely stubbornness. In her mind, it is fidelity. To yield for fear of death would be to betray the truth she has studied and confessed. Modern listeners may not share her doctrine, but they can recognize the structure of conviction. Some beliefs become so central that surrendering them would feel like surviving as a stranger to oneself. Mary may have wanted Jane reconciled to Catholic teaching, perhaps from religious concern, political interest, or both. It is possible that Mary's own suffering had taught her the cost of conscience, even as her reign later demanded obedience from others. That is one of the saddest patterns of the age. The persecuted could become persecutors, not always from hypocrisy, but from certainty. Jane's faith also affects how later generations remember her. Protestant writers turn her into a martyr, a pure witness against Catholic tyranny. Romantic artists later turn her into an innocent victim, pale and blindfolded in imagination, surrounded by men too hard to save her. Both images preserve something, and both reduce something. The real Jane is harder, younger, sharper, devout, frightened, educated, and human. You sit with that complexity. It is more honest to let her be difficult. She can be innocent of ambition, and still severe in belief. She can be manipulated and still make choices. She can be a victim of power and still speak with her own mind. Tragedy does not require perfect softness. Sometimes it becomes more painful when the person inside it has edges. The night before death must have held a silence beyond ordinary silence. Not empty silence, but crowded silence, filled with prayers, memories, and the body's refusal to understand its own ending. Perhaps Jane thinks of childhood lessons, of Plato's pages, of stern parents, of Guildford somewhere nearby under the same shadow. Perhaps she thinks of heaven as a place where no council can reach. There is no crown now. There is no proclamation, no council table, no public claim left to defend. There is only a young woman with a conscience sharpened by study and enclosed by stone. The state has narrowed her world, but faith has made that small world deep. She is walking inward, toward the only authority she believes can overrule kings and queens. And in that inward place, Jane prepares not to win, but to endure. The difference matters. Victory belongs to rulers, armies, and official histories. Endurance belongs to prisoners, witnesses, and those who leave behind letters when they have nothing else to give. Her final resistance is not escape, it is refusal, quietly made, carefully written, terribly costly. The morning on Tower Hill arrives without mercy, yet also without haste. It comes in the ordinary way mornings come, with grey light gathering on a stone, with damp air slipping through narrow openings, with footsteps beginning somewhere beyond sight. You're inside that cold hour, when the world has not yet become noisy, and every small sound seems to carry too much meaning. Jane is not taken first. Guildford Dudley is led out to die before her, and this detail has haunted the story for centuries. The young husband, tied to her fate by marriage and politics, is escorted through the tower's passages toward his own ending. Whether Jane sees him clearly, hears the movement, or receives the knowledge in fragments, the emotional cruelty is difficult to escape. Records confirm that Guildford Dudley was executed on Tower Hill on the 12th of February in 1554, and Jane was executed shortly afterward within the Tower precincts. Scholars at Oxford and Yale have often noted the deliberate difference in location. Guildford dies publicly on the hill. Jane dies privately inside the fortress, a decision likely shaped by rank, gender, and the government's desire to control the spectacle. Imagine the route. The stones are wet beneath guarded feet. Men stand with weapons, not because escape is likely, but because ritual demands enclosure. The air smells of mud, wool, iron, and smoke from early fires beyond the walls. A crowd waits outside for Guildford, drawn by that old human mixture of fear, obedience, pity, and curiosity. Public death is a lesson, and Tudor authority expects attendance. Guildford's death does not dominate Jane's legend, yet it belongs to it. He is sometimes treated as a shadow beside her, reduced to a husband in the wrong family. But he too is young. He too has been carried by dynastic ambition into a place from which youth offers no rescue. A name may be less famous and still belong to a life that ended too soon. A quirky and unsettling tidbit survives in accounts that Jane saw Guildford's body being returned from the scaffold. Some versions say she watched from a window as the cart came back, carrying the remains of the man who had been her husband. Historians treat the exact scene with caution, because later retellings often sharpen sorrow into theatre. Yet the possibility remains devastating. Even rumour can preserve an emotional truth. The open scholarly debate about that morning concerns how much of the famous description comes from reliable eyewitness memory, and how much was shaped later by Protestant martyrology. Some details appear close to contemporary testimony, while others may have been arranged to create a model of holy courage. Still, the broad outline stands. Jane meets death with composure, scripture, and confusion at the final physical moment. That final physical moment matters because it restores her humanity. Legends often make martyrs glide toward death as if already half angel. Jane's end is remembered as brave, but also frighteningly human. She speaks, prays, removes outer garments, and prepares herself as ritual requires. Then, when blindfolded, she cannot find the block. For a few seconds, the ceremony falters. You can feel the room tighten. This is not Tower Hill's open crowd, but a smaller space within the tower, controlled and intimate. There are officials, guards, attendants, and the executioner. The scaffold wood feels rough beneath her hands. The cloth over her eyes makes the world vanish. She reaches out, asking where the block is. Her courage remains. But courage does not give sight through linen. It is one of the most heartbreaking details in English history, not because it is grand, but because it is small. A condemned young woman, prepared in faith, still needs someone to guide her hand. The body remains vulnerable even when the soul is resolute. The moment strips away politics, doctrine, and legend. There is only a blindfolded person searching in the dark. A mainstream historical fact often emphasized by historians of execution ritual is that early modern public punishment depended on ceremony. The condemned were expected to speak well, die well, and affirm the moral order even in death. Jane fulfills much of this expectation, but her brief disorientation reveals how fragile such rituals were. The state could choreograph death, but not remove terror from the body. Jane's final speech is remembered as humble and careful. She acknowledges that she acted unlawfully in accepting the crown, yet she does not accept the deeper guilt of having sought it out. That distinction is vital. She admits the legal fault while preserving the moral shape of her innocence. In doing so, she offers the government enough submission, but leaves history a quiet protest. You hear her voice not as loud, but clear. She asks for prayers. She commends herself to God. The words belong to a religious age, but the emotional structure is timeless. A person facing death tries to put the soul in order, tries to leave behind a final interpretation before others sees the story completely. Last words are not only farewell, they are testimony. Mary's government likely wanted the execution to close a political danger without igniting unnecessary sympathy. Yet sympathy is not so easily governed. Killing Jane removes the living claimant, but creates the remembered victim. This is another bitter trick of power. It can silence breath, but sometimes it gives memory a voice it never had in life. This scaffold scene has endured partly because it combines formal violence with youthful vulnerability. The axe is expected, the blindfolded searching is not. That small confusion has done more for Jane's afterlife than many official documents. It allows listeners to feel the truth that politics often hides. She was young. She was frightened. She was there. The executioner, often imagined as faceless, has his own ritual role. He asks forgiveness, as custom required, and she grants it. This exchange can feel strange to modern ears, almost unbearable in its politeness. The man who will kill her asks pardon. She gives it. Society uses manners to stand beside death without screaming. Very Tudor, very human, very cold. You sense the final stillness before the blow. The gathered witnesses hold their breath. The morning light has strengthened slightly, falling on wood, cloth, faces, and stone. Somewhere outside, the ordinary city continues. Carts move, fires burn, bread is bought. A bell may ring for reasons unrelated to her. History does not ask the world to stop when it takes someone. Then the ritual ends. The body that carried a disputed crown, a dangerous bloodline, a Protestant hope, and other people's ambitions is reduced to silence. The state has finished its work. The Queen's security is strengthened. Perhaps. The rebellion symbol is removed. Certainly. But an absence opens that cannot quite be filled by law. Jane's death is not only the death of a person, it is the end of a possibility, the possibility of Edward's Protestant succession. the possibility of a Dudley royal future, the possibility that Mary might secure her reign without killing the cousin who briefly replaced her. Each possibility closes like a door in stone, yet the emotional echo does not close. It travels outward from the tower, carried by witnesses, writers, reformers, artists, and later generations hungry for tragic innocence. In time, Jane will be painted, mourned, argued over, and simplified. But on that morning, she's not yet a painting. She's a young woman in a cold place, guided at the last by someone's hand. The tower keeps the scene. Stone remembers in the way stone does, silently, by remaining. The river moves nearby, indifferent and faithful, carrying the weathered smell of London toward the sea. And you're left with the hush after ceremony. When the officials depart, the wood is cleared, and the tragedy becomes something quieter than history. It becomes memory. Jane had to die because a living alternative is never merely a person inside a monarchy. She's a door left unlocked. She's a name that can be spoken in a guarded room, written in a secret letter, whispered beside a hearth when soldiers have passed. Mary's throne has been restored, but restoration is not the same as safety. A crown can sit firmly on the head and still tremble in the imagination of a kingdom. The question sounds simple when asked from a comfortable distance. Why execute a young woman who did not design the first plan, who had been placed forward by older hands, who spent her final months behind stone? The answer lies in the hard arithmetic of Tudor rule. Mercy may satisfy the conscience for an evening, but danger returns the next morning wearing another man's boots. Mary is not cruel in the lazy way later enemies sometimes painted her. That would be too simple, and history dislikes simplicity when power is involved. She's a queen newly secured after a direct challenge to her title, facing religious division, foreign marriage fears, uncertain nobles, and the deep memory of her own humiliation. She knows what it means to be declared illegitimate. She knows what it means to survive while others decide whether your blood matters. Records confirm that Mary's reign began under intense pressure to prove legitimacy, authority, and continuity after the succession crisis. Historians at Oxford, Yale, and Stanford have often treated Jane's execution as a political decision shaped by Wyatt's rebellion and the risks surrounding Mary's proposed Spanish marriage. The personal tragedy is undeniable, yet the state's reasoning was brutally coherent. A rival claimant had become too dangerous to leave alive. You can feel the council's argument forming like frost. Jane's innocence, or partial innocence, does not remove her usefulness to rebels. Her youth does not erase her royal descent. Her imprisonment does not prevent her name from travelling. A Protestant nobleman, angry at Mary's marriage or fearful of Catholic restoration, does not need Jane's consent to invoke her. He only needs her existence. This is the terrible difference between guilt and threat. Jane may have been less guilty than others, but she remained threatening in a dynastic sense. Tudor government cared about guilt, certainly, but it cared even more about preventing another crisis. A dead claimant cannot be rescued from prison, married into a faction, smuggled abroad, or displayed as the rightful ruler by men with armies and sermons. A mainstream historical fact, often underlined by scholars of early modern monarchy, is that succession disputes could produce civil war when rival bloodlines remained available. England's ruling class remembered the Wars of the Roses, when noble claims and shifting loyalties had drenched the 15th century in instability. That memory had not vanished. It lay beneath Tudor politics like an old wound under new cloth. Mary's father, Henry VIII, had built his dynasty upon the promise of ending such uncertainty. Yet his own marriages, annulments, statutes, and declarations left the succession emotionally tangled. Mary, Elizabeth, and the Grey Line all existed within a family tree shaped by law and scandal. Jane's 9-day rule exposed how easily that tree could become a scaffold. The open scholarly debate around Mary's decision asks whether she acted from necessity, religious conviction, personal fear, or council pressure. Some historians see her as reluctant, pushed by rebellion into a harsher policy than she first desired. Others argue that royal security made Jane's execution almost unavoidable once the Grey family became linked again to treason. A few emphasise Mary's marriage politics, suggesting that Philip's arrival required a cleaner political field. Each answer catches a different part of the shadow. You stand inside Whitehall or Westminster in imagination, where councillors discuss not a girl, but a risk. That distinction chills the room. When a government stops seeing a prisoner as a person and begins seeing her as a future rebellion, the language changes. It becomes about quieting the realm, securing obedience, preventing disorder, and reassuring allies. One almost misses ordinary cruelty. Bureaucratic necessity is colder. A quirky fringe tidbit sometimes found in later stories claims Mary personally agonised over Jane with near-sisterly grief, while sterner counsellors forced her hand. Other tales make Mary eager for blood, driven by religious hatred and jealousy. Both images are too polished. The truth likely lived in a dimmer place, where pity, fear, policy, and faith pressed against one another until the signature became possible. Mary's own faith cannot be separated from this decision, though it should not be reduced to it. Jane is not only a rival claimant, she is a Protestant symbol, admired by reformers and educated in the very doctrines Mary seeks to reverse. Leaving her alive risks preserving a focus for resistance to Catholic restoration, yet killing her risks creating a martyr. Mary's government must choose which danger seems more manageable. That choice reveals the limits of royal mercy. A monarch may forgive private enemies more easily than public symbols. Jane's supporters had already turned her into a queen once. Wyatt's rising proved that discontent could ignite quickly around marriage, religion, and legitimacy. Even if Jane herself prayed only for peace, others could use her silence as permission. A prison cell does not always contain a symbol. You feel the sadness of Mary's position without needing to excuse the result. She had been wronged, threatened, and nearly displaced. She had a duty, as she understood it, to defend her lawful crown and the religious restoration she believed holy. Yet the defence of her security required killing someone whose danger came largely from what others imagined she might become. That is the moral fog of monarchy. It turns fear into policy and policy into blood. Jane's father's renewed rebellion hardens everything. Henry Grey had already received mercy once, and his involvement in further unrest made the family look permanently unsafe. If even a pardoned father could rise again, why should counsellors believe a living daughter would remain harmless? The argument is unfair to Jane as an individual, but governments often punish families as political units. Tudor England did this with practised ease. There is also the question of gender. Both Mary and Jane are women in a realm still uncertain about female sovereignty. Mary's success must be unmistakable. She cannot appear weak before male counsellors, foreign ambassadors, Protestant nobles, or Catholic allies. Sparing Jane after rebellion might look generous to later generations, but to suspicious contemporaries it could look like hesitation. A queen regnant had to prove that her hand could be as firm as any king's. This does not make Jane's death just. It explains why justice had little room to breathe. Political necessity is often the name power gives to decisions it does not wish to mourn too publicly. The council could speak of treason. Mary could speak of security. The law could speak of sentence. None of those words fully touches the sight of a young woman blindfolded, searching for the block. Perhaps that is why the question endures. Why was Lady Jane Grey executed? Because she had been made into a queen, and then into a possible queen, and possible queens are dangerous in troubled reigns. Because rebellion taught Mary that symbols could gather men faster than mercy could quiet them. Because royal blood, once politicised, cannot easily return to private life. Because the Tudors understood survival as a sacred duty. Even when survival demanded something unforgivable, the tragedy rests there, not in a single evil choice, but in a structure that made death appear reasonable to those who feared disorder. Jane's execution was not the first act of the crisis. It was the state's final answer to a question raised by Edward's device, Northumberland's ambition, Mary's vulnerability, and England's divided soul. And the answer was silence, not peace. Silence. Jane becomes a ghost almost as soon as the tower closes behind her name. Not a ghost in the childish sense, drifting through corridors in pale cloth, but a ghost inside national memory. She remains where arguments gather. Protestants claim her. Romantics soften her. Painters blindfold her. Historians return to the papers, trying to hear the real young woman beneath the layers of pity, doctrine, and art. You feel that afterlife beginning quietly, in handwritten accounts, in printed chronicles, in religious collections that turn suffering into witness. Her death does not remain only an event. It becomes a story with a purpose. For Protestant writers, Jane is not simply the victim of a failed succession. She becomes a godly young martyr, learned, steadfast, and pure against the returning shadow of Rome. A life becomes a lesson. Records confirm that later Protestant histories helped preserve Jane's reputation, especially through accounts of her letters, her disputations, and her conduct at death. Scholars at Oxford, Yale, and Cambridge have often noted that these sources are precious but shaped by religious memory. They do not erase Jane, they frame her. Every frame reveals something, and every frame hides something too. You can imagine a reader decades later, sitting beside a small fire with a printed book in hand. The room smells of smoke, wool, and old paper. Outside, rain touches the window. The reader pauses over Jane's final words and feels not political calculation, but intimacy. A dead girl's courage enters a living room. That is how memory travels, not as an army, but as a page turning softly. The Elizabethan age helps change Jane's meaning. Under Elizabeth I, Protestant England gains a ruler whose survival and settlement make Jane's fate look like a warning from a darker path. Jane becomes the queen who might have been, the brief flame before a longer Protestant light. This reading is emotionally powerful, but not neutral. It turns Jane into a prelude, and people are rarely only preludes. A mainstream historical fact often emphasised by scholars of Tudor memory is that later political needs shaped how earlier figures were remembered. Elizabethan and later Protestant writers had reasons to present Jane as innocent, learned, and spiritually victorious. Her tragedy strengthened arguments about Catholic cruelty and Protestant endurance. Memory, like government, has policies of its own, yet Jane's story does not remain only religious. Over centuries, it becomes increasingly sentimental, especially as later audiences focus on youth, innocence, and the brutality of power. The learned Protestant disputant becomes, in many retellings, the delicate girl in white. The theologian becomes the victim. The sharp mind becomes the trembling hand. Something is gained in tenderness, and something is lost in truth. A quirky fringe tidbit appears in the long fascination with supposed relics connected to Jane. Books, locks of hair, inscriptions, and personal objects have been claimed, treasured, doubted, and reinterpreted across time. Some are genuine or plausible, others are uncertain, but the hunger for such objects is revealing. People want grief to have texture. They want to touch history, even when history refuses to be held. Perhaps that is why the famous 19th century painting of Jane's execution became so powerful. It shows her blindfolded, reaching for the block, surrounded by figures arranged in dramatic sorrow. The painting is not a photograph of Tudor reality. Of course, it is a later dream of innocence. Yet it shaped popular imagination so deeply that many people see that image before they see the documents. Art can become memory's doorway. The open scholarly debate around Jane's afterlife asks whether her legend has obscured the political person she truly was. Some historians argue that sympathy has made her too passive, erasing her religious agency and intellectual force. Others suggest that older narratives overstate her agency to make the legal outcome seem more comfortable. The more careful view lets her remain both used and believing, both vulnerable and formidable. That balance matters. Jane deserves more than to be turned into porcelain. Porcelain breaks beautifully, but it does not think, Jane thought. She argued. She read difficult books. She judged doctrine. She may have accepted the crown because powerful people pressed her, but also because she believed Edward's Protestant settlement mattered eternally. The sorrow deepens when you allow her mind to remain present. Mary's memory suffers in the same process. The more innocent Jane becomes, the darker Mary must appear. Later Protestant history gives Mary a fierce and bloody outline, while Jane glows brighter in contrast. Yet Mary, too, was shaped by pain, legitimacy, faith, and fear. Recognizing that does not soften Jane's death into justice. It simply returns complexity to a story that propaganda once polished into opposing icons. You stand now in a museum gallery, perhaps centuries removed from the Tower mourning. People move slowly across wooden floors. A painting hangs beneath controlled light. Someone leans closer to read a label. Another person steps back, overwhelmed by the size of the canvas and the quiet terror of the scene. The past has become culture, framed and lit, yet still somehow breathing. There is something unsettling in that transformation. Jane's execution was once a political act meant to remove danger. Instead, it created a memory that outlived almost everyone who signed, judged, or benefited. The council's calculations are studied by specialists. Mary's reign is debated in classrooms. Northumberland's ambition is examined in biographies. But Jane's blindfolded hand remains in the wider imagination, searching. That searching hand is perhaps the central image, whether or not every detail reached us perfectly. It symbolizes more than one frightened moment. It is the gesture of a person placed inside a system she cannot see clearly, reaching for the structure that will end her. Many lives in history feel like that. Not only royal lives. People move through laws, families, faiths, and ambitions built by others, trying to find where they are supposed to place their hands. Jane's 9 days also speak to the strange violence of expectation. She's expected to obey parents, accept marriage, defend religion, receive a crown, submit to judgment, die well, and then remain useful to memory. Even after death, she's asked to serve. Each age makes a Jane it can understand. The martyr Jane, the victim Jane, the scholar Jane, the pawn Jane, the queen Jane. Perhaps none is complete alone. You hear the tower bells in imagination, though the real bells have long since changed their meaning. You smell the Thames, cold and tidal. You see the grey stone, patient and indifferent. Tourists pass through the grounds now, speaking softly, looking at plaques, taking photographs, wondering how such small rooms could hold such large fears. The place survives because stone is stubborn. Human certainty is less so. Why was Lady Jane Grey executed? By now, the answer is no longer a single sentence. She died because law, fear, faith, rebellion, inheritance, and political necessity converged upon one young body. She died because men used her claim, because Mary feared another rising, because royal blood could not be made harmless once it had touched the throne. She died because Tudor England often solved uncertainty with death. But perhaps the deeper reason her story endures is not that she was queen for 9 days. It is that those 9 days reveal the frightening speed with which a person can be renamed by power. Daughter, bride, queen, traitor, prisoner, martyr, ghost. The words change, and the person inside them struggles to remain visible. In the last fading light of this story, Jane is not only on the scaffold. She's also at the desk, reading. She's at the wedding feast, silent beneath expectation. She's in the tower chamber, listening to bells meant for someone else. She's in the pages that preserved her, in the paintings that softened her, and in the questions that refused to close. And perhaps the story is not yet complete. The room grows quieter now, and the old stones begin to lose their sharp edges. You do not need to hold every date, every title, or every name. Let them drift away slowly, like candle smoke rising into a dark beam above a table. What remains is only the feeling of a summer court, a winter rebellion, and a young voice trying to remain steady while the world turned against her. Outside the imagined tower, the river keeps moving. It carries moonlight, rainwater, forgotten footsteps, and the soft reflections of walls that have watched kings and queens pass like shadows. The city beyond it settles into sleep. Doors close, fires sink low. Somewhere, a bell sounds once, then leaves the air open again. You can let Jane return to silence without forcing an answer from her. Not every sorrow explains itself. Some sorrows only ask to be witnessed gently, without shouting, without certainty, and without turning away too quickly. The crown has vanished. The courtroom is empty. The scaffold has been cleared. The papers are folded. The names rest where history placed them. Breathe slowly now. The past is distant, and you are safe in the present. The stone is only stone again. The river is only water. The old fear softens into mist, and the mist thins into night. And perhaps, somewhere beyond judgment, beyond politics, beyond all those narrow Tudor rooms, the girl who was made into a queen for 9 days is finally only herself. End of script. Good night.